Okay. Now if I put a negation sign in front of the one side of this, right? It's not the case that everything is this. That turns out to be equivalent to saying there is something that is not that. It's not the case that everything is this. Also, there is something that is not that. If I take away that negation sign and put one over here, so it's for anything you pick, it's not this. That's equivalent to saying that it's not the case that there is something that is that. For anything you pick, it's not this. So it's not the case that there is something that is that. Right? And the last possibility here is I put a negation sign in front of there and in front of here. And notice I end up with there exists an X such that it is this. Because this says for anything you pick, it's not the case that for anything you pick, it's not this. That's equivalent to saying, well, there is something that is that. So here we have 4 expressions, each of which takes a quantifier that is the analytic type quantifier and demonstrates that it has an equivalent specific quantifier or existential quantifier. So whereas prior to this analysis, people always thought you had these 2 separate kinds of knowledge, Quine all of a sudden demonstrates in 1951, the year I was born, that actually, no, they're equivalent. So ever since Aristotle, we've been thinking there's 2 different kinds of knowledge. Actually, there's only one kind of knowledge. And we're constantly double checking the things that we think we're sure of. So the universal quantifiers have an equivalent existential quantifier that means, in a very pragmatic sense, that we're never settled on the definition of the objects that we're talking about. There's always the potential for us to see change in those definitions. Doesn't happen very often. I mean, on a lot of things. Some things, yes, like whether I'm a persistent self or whatever. But when I'm talking about something no one wants to argue about, like the nature of horses and animals, no problem. We don't have to deal with it. But in a sense, this is part of what is the continuation in pragmatism of the analysis of how language works. And of course, our knowledge base is based on how language works. So if you're going to understand your knowledge, you have to understand how your language works. That's why we're so fascinated with the 7,000 different languages that are out there. What do they all mean to us? How important are they? Do we have to learn how they all work? My one book group just this weekend discussed a book called The Alaska Laundry. By Brendan Jones. I don't recommend it. Hated the book. Glad we read it, because occasionally you need to read something that you think, this is terrible. The main character is Tara, and Tara is a female, a young female, and the author is not a young male. Well, I mean, he is a male, but he's not young. And it just so happens that he, as an author, if you look up Brendan, he studied at Oxford. He learned boxing, He did graduate, but meanwhile he also worked as a fisherman in Alaska, and also he worked as like in a sawmill or recovering used wood and making houses out of it. Had a company with employees and so on, married, kids, and so on. So interesting guy. He actually writes other articles too that are in the local media and so on. But as a book, I thought it was terrible because, number one, it's clearly not a young woman's thinking. I mean, even I knew that. This is not a real person. Plus, the idea of the Alaska Laundry is that Alaska treats people in a really difficult way. It's kind of like a laundromat where people come to Alaska, get thrown into the washing machine and spun around, and it cleans you off and spits you out so that you can go back home, in this case Philadelphia, and you'll be new again. You're washed clean of all of the problems you had because Alaska is so harsh, with all the things that happen to you, bear attacks and your tent catching on fire and people that you work with on the fishing boat losing eyes and fingertips and all the kinds of things that are tough. Every single character in the book is weird. They're like not real people as far as I know. They're all kind of a caricature of an old bearded Alaskan. Oh wait. However, why did I go there? I don't know that there's a movie. Why did I go there? Maybe I am getting old. I remember what the point was that I brought that up. I was going to emphasize something that I was talking about before I did that. Well, I'll end the discussion of Quine at that point. Quine, personally, by the way, I don't think I actually had kept a page on him. Okay. It was interesting. He was from Akron, Ohio. I went to Ohio. What was the college he went to? Oberlin College, but then Harvard. He was a roommate when he arrived as a freshman at Harvard. Or not as a freshman, as a graduate student at Harvard. He arrived with a new roommate whose name was B.F. Skinner. So if you're familiar with B.F. Skinner, imagine those two as roommates. And as the story goes, Quine didn't really know what he wanted to study, and Skinner didn't know what he wanted to study. And Quine suggested to Skinner that he study psychology, and Skinner suggested to Quine that he study mathematical logic, I guess. So in any case, they both had an impact on one another. B.F. Skinner is the one who invents the idea of behavioral psychology, the pigeon in the box, with a little button, and the pigeon learns how to get the seed by pushing on the light, and behavior modification. So for Skinner, we couldn't actually see what was going on in the brain, so it's all the philosophical nonsense about trying to figure out what the nature of the self is. It's useless. Let's just do science and study stimulus and response. Just write down, this stimulus, this response, this stimulus, this response, and we end up with a whole set of what stimuli will cause what responses, and if we want these responses, then we just give them this stimuli, and we can change a person by just giving them the right stimuli, etc. One of Skinner's books was Beyond Freedom and Dignity, the idea being that people end up being treated often the way they are because we expect them on their own to behave properly. But when you look at the individual that hasn't had the right kind of stimuli, they're not going to behave the right kind of way. So if we want to go beyond human dignity, what we need is to give people the right kind of stimuli in order to get them to behave the way we want them to. It's not their fault. They haven't gotten the right stimuli all their lives. Fix it by changing the environment, and then you'll change them. That's B.F. Skinner in a nutshell. One of his other books, by the way, was Walden 2. If you're familiar with Walden Pond by Thoreau, Walden 2 was a book that basically outlined how we could have a nice communal kind of life. And in fact, an awful lot of people read the book, were thrilled with it, and started creating hippie communes all over different places. In fact, there's an interesting video of B.F. Skinner visiting one of those communes and him sitting there in a suit and listening to a bunch of hippies with babies, kind of interesting. Okay, but so he graduated and joined the Navy, and in the Navy he worked as a intelligence officer decoding naval traffic from the submarines by the Nazis. The submarines were traveling up and down our coast, trying to bomb, torpedo the ships that were heading towards England with supplies to help them fight during the war. Remember the U-boats, right? So he worked trying to decode that traffic. Following the war, he was sent to Europe in order to basically recruit brilliant Jewish logicians and encourage them to move to the United States. Rudolf Carnap, for example, was one. But there were a couple that he was involved with that basically were still working on the language issues that he was studying, so he was a perfect match for this. He was both a student to them, but at the same time lured them to go to Stanford or other places, so that they would avoid what would happen. Actually, this was prior to Hitler. So this was so actually before he was in the Navy, he was doing this as a graduate student, because of course he got them out in time before the Holocaust. Some of them. So that's kind of neat. Okay. So the book I wanted to mention, though, was Two Dogmas of Empiricism. And notice that you could actually find the whole thing. Oh dear. Okay, so analyticity is the idea that we have the analytic knowledge, etc. So, very readable, actually. All right. Quiz question. There is a debate Notice, by the way, this is my last set of class notes. So if somebody was looking for me to post more this Saturday, I did not, because this is it.
just about everything. One of the questions is, why did it all happen then? What was the reason for this flashpoint? And perhaps it was something to do with the...
So this is a debate. It's a program called Intelligence Squared. So this is a British venue, but they also have Intelligence Squared in the U.S. So it's a show that you can find multiple debates and so on. Some of them are really fascinating. I think they're neat. Plus, they have a technique where they ask everybody to vote on the issue that's under question at the beginning, and then they vote again on the end. And the person who wins is the one who changed the most votes. And in this particular debate, you have Boris.
Please.
Oops, that's not Boris.
And urge Congress to make.
Who's able to expropriate...
How many folks are familiar with Boris Johnson?
To be exact.
Yes, because he's actually one of my favorite politicians, and it bugs me when people compare him to another blonde, because this guy speaks Greek. And writes books, and they're really his books. So he's actually a brilliant person.